welcome to Beginnings, a series of interviews focused on the birth of playback theatre in Australia and New Zealand 40 years ago. I'm Michael Pooley, and this is the full interview with Peter Hall, who, as you'll hear, has been deeply involved with playback theatre for those 40 years. Peter was in the first Sydney Playback Company, and while he says he's retired, he is still teaching playback and engaged with the Australasian playback community, and he's been an important playback mentor for me and for many others. This was the first interview I did for this project, and the fact that I enjoyed it and learnt so much was a big factor in deciding to go ahead with the other interviews. As you'll hear, playback is a core part of who Peter is, and this comes through strongly in his reflections on what is at the heart of this form of theatre that he loves deeply. It's also just great listening to his stories of the 1980 trip by members of the original Playback Company, as well as moments from the early Sydney performances and rehearsals. I met with Peter at his home in Leura in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney on the 19th of May 2019. Unfortunately, there is quite a bit of car noise in the background of this interview, but just ignore that and enjoy these wonderful Peter Hall reflections. What would be a good place to start is just for you to introduce yourself and give a bit of a sketch of you and playback theatre.
I'm Peter Hall. I was a member of the original Sydney Playback Company. So I was in the company from 1980 when it started until the end of 2000. In the 80s I had a couple of periods away, but I was pretty consistent over that time. In the early 90s, I was part of the committee that organised the first international playback conference in Sydney. There'd been a conference the year before in Melbourne, but this was the first international one. That was 92 maybe. The middle of the 90s, 2 years in a row, I was on the faculty of the Playback School in upstate New York. And around that time, I joined the board of the IPTN and was for a short time president of the IPTN until ill health forced me to resign. I stopped doing playback at the end of 2000 when I stopped working altogether, again due to health issues. And since 2014, I've been doing bits and pieces of training, mostly in the Sydney Blue Mountains region, but went to the Hobart gathering and got some other things that I'm doing, but just bits and pieces of training. I'm mostly retired now.
So it's a long association between you and playback?
Yes, started in 75 and I started in 1980. So
in 1980 you were at the Drama Action Centre?
Yep, the Drama Action Centre began in 1980. Started by Bridget Brandon and Frances Batten, was a school that combined several things: the mask work of Jacques Lecoq, improvisational theatre, and the process and methods of Marino and psychodrama. And it was a completely unique combination. I was one of the inaugural 30 students, and somewhere in the first half of that year, these posters started to appear. They were a reddish, brownish colour with the outline of a fox. And all they said was, "Jonathan Fox is coming."
Right.
And they started to appear around Sydney. And then Bridget and Frances said, "Jonathan Fox and some other people are coming from New York to run workshops in this new-ish form of theatre called playback theatre. And you all have to go. It'll be fantastic. And you all have to go." Because they were sponsoring them in Sydney. So there were 4 people who came out from America: Jonathan Fox, his partner Joe Salas, Judy Swallow and Michael Clemente, who were members of the original Playback Company. They did workshops in New Zealand and in Melbourne and in Sydney. And I went to the second of the workshops in Sydney, which was a 4-day workshop where I encountered playback theatre.
Right.
And at the end of that workshop, the 4 Americans Bridget, Francis, Mary Good, myself went up to this beach in the Ku-ring-gai National Park. It was an outing before they flew back to the States, and there was much conversation, and Bridget and Francis and Mary, who were the senior people there, basically said, we'd like to start a company here. What do you think about that? And Jonathan and the others said, yes, please do. There's a terrific sense of connection between what we do and what you do. The only thing we ask is that you acknowledge where the work has come from.
Yeah.
Playback is improvised. Yeah. It's profoundly about story. It's about community. It's about theatre that is not in theatres, but in the world where people actually live. And it's about giving voice to people's stories. And that's very much what Francis and Bridget's vision of theatre was. People making their own theatre from their own sources in para-theatrical settings. So that the links were just really strong and clear. And I know that Jonathan and Joe and the others loved the physicality that was an inherent part of the work of Drama Action Centre, which was the Lecockian mask work. So that the parallels were really strong. And I know that Mary had, I think, already been to the States and met them and done some work with them prior to that. They were really happy that Bridget and Francis and Mary take up stewardship of the idea in Australia.
And was it a combination of people that brought Jonathan and Joe and the others out? Or was
yes, it was. I don't know who. No. I know that Bridget and Francis, through the Drama Action Centre, sponsored them in Sydney. But there was I think a guy in Melbourne, Phil Boas. I don't know who sponsored them in New Zealand.
So that conversation up in Ku-ring-gai National Park.
That was the seed of playback companies in Australia and New Zealand. So the Americans went back to America. Bridget and Francis and Mary organised auditions, and quite a lot of people auditioned. And then there were 3 of them, so they selected 10 people to join them to form a company. And we started to rehearse.
Just going back a step, what's your memory of the workshops, that 4-day workshop that you did with Jonathan and Joe?
Crowded. There were 40 people.
Right.
In a scout hall. Drama Action has been big on scout halls in its history. It was just a place of delighted discovery for me. Because for me too, it brings together so much of what I've been interested in my creative life. Physical improvisation, storytelling. I feel that my work as a writer has a place in playback, both as an actor and conductor, the framing of words. So I got to play for 4 days with this new thing that I didn't even know existed before those 4 days. And I just took to it.
Was what was presented then as playback theatre, did that look very different from how it looks now?
In its essence, no. The stage is the same. You know, there's a circle. There's the conductors and tellers chair, the actors, the musician, and audience. There were only 3 forms. There was fluid sculptures, stories, and pairs. They did something in stories they called a lineal, but there were fluid sculptures, stories, and pairs. So there's been a giddy explosion of new forms in the last decade and a half, but the shape is the same. Mm-hmm. And I think the core intention is the same. That's what still holds the form.
And the way that Jonathan and Joe talked about that intention, what's your memory of that?
There's a lot of talk now about playback as a tool for social change. To me, then, that phrase wasn't to the fore. I think it's there, always been there as part of the intention, but the talk was a theatre made by, Jonathan's idea of the citizen actor. So people in the community come together to create a forum for other people in the community to tell their stories. And that the form is a service to the community and to the people doing it. So it's good for all. And it's about the spark of creativity that comes from improvisation. It's about the core place of story in human life. And it's about building community. And to build community, you have to be able to hold breadth of experience, different voices. Community is not homogeneity. It's about drawing links and giving voice to the unspoken or rarely spoken, giving voice to the uncomfortable, giving voice to something you've never heard before. And at its best, it just reaches right into the heart of what is human, so that we see where we're different and where we're linked.
And it sounds like a lot of that, at its core, was well formed at that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
This didn't just fall out of a tree. Jonathan does talk about walking along maybe beside the Hudson River and the idea coming to him, but he already had a lot formed in himself, and then set about with the original company working out how to do this and how to do it well. And of course, over the last 45 years, a lot more thought has gone into what it is and how to do it.
So going back now to early rehearsals, this initial company is chosen. You were one of that company. What were initial rehearsals like?
We were feeling our way in the dark. They'd come, done some workshops, left. Bridget and Francis and Mary had their own experience, and we, with them, we were teaching ourselves how to do it. We were trying to work out how to do it ourselves. We set a 3-month rehearsal period, weekly rehearsals, and then we would perform, so that there was a deadline to work towards. And that first performance of Sydney Playback Theatre, I think it was either September or October 1980.
So had there been a performance while the Americans were here? Right.
Yeah, they did a performance at the Nimrod Theatre. The 4 Americans, Francis, Bridget, maybe a couple of other people from the workshop, a very well attended performance.
So you'd seen a performance?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, we saw the form enacted in the workshops.
Yes.
But you know that when you induct a new person into your company, they're working with very experienced people over a number of months before you let them loose in a performance. And then you pick a very experienced team to work with the new performer in the performance, so that they're really well supported. So I'd had 4 days of a training workshop, and then we were teaching ourselves. Now, you know, Bridget and Francis and Mary were highly skilled, but they hadn't had much more playback training. There wasn't playback training except for the workshops that the 4 Americans did. I remember that we did the first performance at St John's Church Hall in Paddington.
Right. And were you a part of that performance?
200 people came, and we couldn't decide who should be part of the first performance. So everyone was on stage. There was a conductor, 11 actors, and a musician. And when we did fluid sculptures, like all 11 actors were on stage, and 3 or 4 people would step out to do the fluid sculpture. So we didn't have 11 people fluid sculptures. Maybe 5, maybe 6, but...
What did it feel like, that first performance?
Oh, it was wildly exciting. Wildly exciting, and it was this new thing. And apart from the original company, that there was no other playback companies in the world. It was standing room only in that hall. And then we settled into a rhythm of monthly performances, which started to happen in a community hall in Greenwich. which wasn't so far from where the Drama Action Centre was in those days.
I imagine that first performance gave a huge boost to the company. Just give us a sense of how things, you mentioned the monthly performances, but how did things kind of play out over that initial period after that first performance?
Such a long time ago, Michael. Yeah. My sense is that, things settled down and we got down to work and we got better at doing it as we practiced doing it and learnt about how to do it in the fire of performance. Mm-hmm. And the first performances I did as an actor, I would go home afterwards and not be able to sleep. I would be so alive in my body and so full of all the stories and moments just coursing through my being that I could not sleep. And the rehearsal after a public performance would be quite intense as we tried to learn from what went well and what often didn't go so well. And there were tears and intensities. And we were, like I said, we were still working out how to do it, but things did settle into a rhythm and we taught ourselves how to do it and started to get a handle on what it meant to be a conductor. And I think the hardest thing still to do in playback performance is stories. And I think part of the motivation for developing lots of short forms is to avoid doing stories. They're complex, and to do them well takes a lot of skill at theatre, but a lot of skill in terms of understanding of story, understanding of context, being able to listen into someone else's experience. And conducting is hugely complex.
So in those early performances, story played a bigger part than it does now, or?
I don't really have a comparison, but my sense would be that you would do a few, I'm not going to give a number, a few fluid sculptures. Then you might do a story. Then to change the rhythm, you would do some pairs, and then you'd finish with another couple of stories. So there'd be a changing rhythm through the evening.
So, company life.
Oh, company life!
It is as much, if not more, of the energy of playback. What was establishing that early company like?
There was such tremendous goodwill and such a committed sense of wanting to learn how to do it. We all believed in it so deeply and knew we had gold and just wanted to keep polishing the gold. So there was tremendous goodwill and it was intense, We wanted to learn, and so how do you give feedback that's useful, that can be heard? How do you work out a process in rehearsal where you can learn from each other? I don't remember big disagreements. I've got some memories of people being in tears and then us having to process things. Bridget and Francis and Mary were highly skilled group leaders, all psychodrama trained, so that the process was always really strongly held, and they were learning too. I know that the Montreal conference, you did a workshop. Some people from Sydney did a workshop about company life and processes for a healthy company life. And some of that stuff in Sydney must have been forming back then. But I don't know what we did. But there were certainly differences and there were certainly upsets. And I know those three people who were the leaders of the company were highly skilled group leaders. And it's often fraught, company life. And it was well held.
In thinking about those early performances, are there moments that stand out for you still?
Yes. That first performance I told you about with 11 actors on stage. Warming up for a public performance, we were having a game of tag outside. I, in inimitable Peter style, jumped down a flight of stairs and went over on my ankle. Without knowing it, broke my ankle. Couldn't walk. So I became the musician for the performance because I couldn't walk. I remember being chosen in a role in a story to be an Irish person. I don't remember the story, but I entered the stage and made an attempt to speak in an Irish accent, and it came out as an Anglo-Indian accent, which brought the house down. And I have never tried an accent since. Yeah. The first time I conducted, I'd seen Jonathan do a little bit of conducting, Bridget and Mary, maybe Frances conduct. But I was so nervous that I wrote a script for the introduction to the show, for the introduction to pairs, for the introduction to stories, for the conclusion of the show, and I didn't really know what I was doing. Like I said, I'd watched them do it. That's memories. And we had, in those very early years, we got a job doing some performances in nursing homes for Senior Citizens Week. And we went in full of confidence to the first performance and learned some very hard lessons. A lot of people in wheelchairs and a lot of people with no mobility or very limited mobility, which sort of blew apart the idea of a playback stage and the teller's chair, and people had trouble hearing and they were coming to see a show, so they wanted to do lots of singing. The first one was just quite disastrous. So we went away and talked about it, and when we went to the second show, we introduced ourselves and then we sang a song with everyone, like You Are My Sunshine. I loved it. And then the conductor walked around the audience, didn't have people come out to a chair. We went to the audience because most of the people couldn't get out of their chairs, and the conductor would talk to people in their chair and, if necessary, relay the experience to the actors. And then we'd have a break and we'd sing another song. And so we had to modify what we were doing to meet this particular audience. And there was a lot of learning in that for us, so that we stayed true to the essential nature of what we were doing, but modified it to fit the context.
So how early in the process did commissioned work happen?
I reckon in the first year. So it started in 1980, October, November. We did 2 public shows before Christmas. 1981, I reckon those senior citizen shows were 82. I think we were getting bits and pieces of work in 81.
Okay.
Now, where, I don't know.
Right. Was there ever a question about, is playback right for that situation?
I don't think so. Like there was a really strong commitment to continuing with public performances, having that continuity, and Drama Action Centre was a sort of umbrella. So there was quite a strong Drama Action Centre community, and Sydney Playback started to build its own community. So a community of people started to form. People would come regularly to the monthly performances, which of course is where some of the commission work came from. The public performance, people come to you, and a community of the Sydney Playback community started to build up, and people would come and come again and come again. And of course there was a very strong link between the Sydney Playback community and the Drama Action Centre community. And Drama Action Centre Playback Theatre became part of the curriculum, and Drama Action Centre started to offer playback theatre workshops and trainings. And then people started to invite us into community and organisational settings. And we were very excited about that, still very naive about that. And had a lot to learn about the preparation required for that to happen well. A lot of that fell to the conductor, and in most cases still does. Initial phone conversation maybe, or someone comes up at the end of a public performance, I'd like you to come here and or give me a call and go and have a look at the venue and what's the audience size, and then starting to work out fees. And early on, there were all sorts of discussions around costumes. They had some costume designer designed these costumes for us, which were all different shades of green, and they were pajama-y type costumes, which I don't think were flattering, but I'm not a designer. Well, the pattern for a long time was people wore T-shirts and trousers, and you had the same colour. Mm-hmm. So like you were all white, or you were all green, or you were all black. And then I think it became same colour pants and different coloured T-shirts, and the different coloured T-shirts were important to have because people respond to colours differently, and colours can have significance, even a subconscious significance. I want the person in yellow to be that role because who knows why. But so it took a long time to settle on any sort of consistent costume. And again, as I was saying, to learn how to take playback into the community.
So huge learning around all of that.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're dealing with the same issues, mind you, with all that experience, but still all those same issues are there. And in your early time in playback, did Jonathan and Joe or any of the other original company members come back to Sydney?
The next time I did something with Jonathan was 1985, and I did a 5-day advanced conductor course with him in Melbourne. It wasn't very long before my son was born, so June, July 1985. I don't remember them coming out before then. Again,
sure.
That's the next thing I did. It was a fantastic training with people from around Australia, maybe New Zealand as well.
And so I imagine by that stage, things had been established.
So, Mary went back to Melbourne in 81 and set up the Melbourne company. Company started in Auckland and Wellington. Deborah Pearson set up a company in Perth. She was at that conductor workshop. So there was a sense of, there were 4, 5, 6 companies by then, Australia and New Zealand, and a lot of cross-fertilisation between those companies.
And I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but how crucial was that relationship between Playback and the Drama Action Centre?
Fundamental. So much of the, I talked earlier about the shared values and purpose and intentions of the Drama Action and Playback. Mid-90s, there was a conference, in Olympia in Seattle, Playback conference, and I was there, and a number of other Australians and New Zealanders were there, and we did a combined Australian and New Zealand performance. The Americans were sort of a bit taken aback by our raw physicality and dubbed us gumboot playback. And the Australians and New Zealanders sort of thought that the American performers were much less physically robust. And that physical robustness was a direct result of the work of the Drama Action Centre and the work of Bridget and Francis, their work right around Australia and New Zealand, based in Lecoq's mask work. So there's that influence on the performing, and then it was Drama Action Centre that brought Playback to Sydney, and Bridget and Francis, along with Mary Good, who set up Playback Theatre Sydney, and the two had a very close relationship all the way through till the end of 2000 when Drama Action Centre closed. And often when the venue was right, Sydney Playback monthly performances happened at the Drama Action Centre.
Yeah.
And the two mailing lists would have crossed over, and Playback Theatre became part of the curriculum of Drama Action Centre. And I think people associated the two things together.
You mentioned before that strength of facilitation, or that ability to hold the group that Bridget and Francis and Mary had, and that psychodrama was a part of that. Was there something in that contributed strongly to the beginning of...
Again, I said earlier, Drama Action Centre was a unique synthesis. There's been nothing before or since like it. The maskwork of Lecoq, paratheatrical improvisation, and the action methods of Marino. So all the processes and the working method and the training method at Drama Action Centre was just steeped in psychodramatic principles, and linked that with, and the core, one of the cores of all of those, Lecoq and improvisation and psychodrama, is the whole idea of spontaneity, how to be adequately in the moment, maintain yourself while events around you unfold. That's what you do when you improvise. That's what you do when you lead a group. That's what you do when you carry the mask. You're in the moment, maintaining yourself physically and intellectually while events unfold around you. And that's what you do in a group process. When the shit hits the fan in company life, who holds the process, and how do you maintain yourselves and have the capacity to hold yourselves and the ability to think about what might happen next. As conductors and actors, we often don't know what is going to happen next, and we learn how to hold ourselves in the not knowing and keep thinking and be available to what's emerging.
How long did that first company stay as a company?
Maybe till 82, somewhere in 82, 83 I went overseas, and I think the company went into recess for some time. Mm-hmm. And then I think we started up again in 84. Francis and Bridget were still around and I was there, but that very first company from 80 through 82, that very first group.
One thing I forgot to ask, you mentioned it a little bit, but the first performance that Jonathan and Joe and Michael and the others did, you said that was very well attended. Do you have any other memory of that?
Yes, I told a story in that performance about a bird. I had long curly hair then, and the story was about being out in the bush and a bird buzzing my head and then landing on my head and plucking a hair out of my head. And it did this several times, and it was clearly getting stuff for its nest. And I don't know that it was acted so well, but I got to experience directly the power of sitting in the teller's chair, and that as a teller, I'm very forgiving of the actors. Like it's a powerful place to be, to sit on the public stage and tell your story. And then this enactment happens, and it's incredibly validating and kind of special. We don't get seen enough, perhaps.
Not like that.
Not like that. So I do remember that quite vividly.
It's a pretty strong link with the beginnings.
Yeah, I guess I could say I was on stage for the first ever performance of Playback Theatre in Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would add?
Just what an extraordinary gift it was. So these people came from their home and they said, "We've made this thing and we're happy for you to take it because we believe in it and we can see that you do too." It was a gift, and it's been a gift that has enlivened and nourished and expanded my being, and it's spreading like wildfire now around the world. And there's all sorts of organised trainings and schools and qualifications. But that was a gift.
Mm. Thanks, Peter. In editing these reflections, I've heard those final words of Peter's many, many times, and they strike home each time. That was an interview with Peter Hall, member of the first Sydney Playback Company. You can hear the full interviews with others who were instrumental in the founding of Sydney Playback at its website, playbacktheatre.com.au. Click on the menu and then enter History in the search bar at the bottom of the page. Each of the interviews has more than I was able to include in the edited video version and are worth a listen. Please email me at michael.pooley@iinet.net.au if you have memories, photos or stories to share about Sydney Playback at any stage of its 40-year history. We'd love to have those for our archive. Thanks for listening.